In this video, we're going to talk about sovereign risk. This is part of international risk when you're doing business with another country or countries. To introduce it, by definition, risk that repayments from foreign borrowers may be interrupted because of interference from foreign governments. So to better explain, this is not necessarily the risk of a foreign government not paying you. It's, let's say you lent some money, you made a loan to a company in a different country. That country, and under bad situation or circumstances, may interfere and tell those companies to pause payments to you, the lender, in a different country. This became more of an issue. I mean, it's always there, but starting in the 70s, there was this expansion of loans to Eastern Europe, Latin America, etc. So then more loans are exposed to this type of risk. So then it becomes economically significant, not just a few players or smaller amounts. Around the beginning of 1980s, for example, Brazil and Mexico put a debt moratoria, which is just a moratorium, just what it sounds like, where the governments went ahead and told the companies to cease making payments to foreign lenders. Then, and there's, it becomes a law in that country. They do that to keep cash in the country, several other reasons, in order to keep capital in the country while they fix any financial problems they may have or economic issues. So then that, in turn, has an increase in loan loss reserves for the ones that are not getting the money. For example, Citicorp set aside additional $3 billion in reserves while they waited for this moratoria to lift. In the early 2000s, then we had concerns in Argentina and Turkey for different reasons, but they both had some economic turmoil. In the late 2000s, the economies plummeted. You may be familiar with the financial crisis that we had. Developed countries faced some of the worst declines in GDP ever experienced. That's what they call the Great Recession. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, pledged to inject $250 billion during this crisis. Then right after that, then we had the Greece debt crisis. Greece went through a really bad few years there between 2009 and 2012. And because, as you know now, globalization is a thing, the crisis in Greece spread to Portugal, Spain, and Italy. This is not abnormal that a crisis in one country creates like an infection, a virus. And then they put these stop payments, to put it that way, and then you get multi-year restructuring agreements. These restructuring may include these stop payments. They don't have to, but it may include. So aside from the stop payment, another way that a government may interfere with debt outside their country, it's in this restructuring. It's not just about whether you make the payment or not or pause it, but they then also renegotiate the interest rates and the payment terms. They may stretch the amount of the time they have to pay it back, lower the interest, sometimes partially forgive some of the debt. They don't want to see any money back. But the point is that the lender, when you lend this money out as a lender, you understand these risks and you attach it to the premium. And if it doesn't work out, then you just have to deal and get the best you can according to the situation. So credit risk versus sovereign risk. Well, they're similar because it's still the risk to on lending, but here are the key points. Governments can impose restrictions on debt repayments to outside creditors. That is sovereign or country risk. Loan may be forced into default, even though borrower had a strong credit rating at origination of loan. So let's say today you lend to a private company in a different country and everything looked right. But as you can tell, sometimes countries or politics or any reason it just may turn really fast. And now you're not receiving your payments because of outside reasons that not necessarily had to do with the company itself. Legal remedies are very limited. Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, see, if somebody doesn't pay you, you sue them, you trigger bankruptcy, you confiscate their assets. That may not be the case here, because let's say confiscation of assets would trigger bankruptcy, you'll have to go through the government of that country. But if it is the government saying don't make the payments, they're not going to enforce that. So legal remedies are very, very limited. There's ways to manage that risk and to have other types of collateral outside those countries, but that's just part of the deal that you structure at the beginning, if that's the case. But we're speaking when specifically inside that country. It's not like you can go make a legal claim because it is the legal system saying not to pay you. Emphasizes the need to assess credit quality and soaring risk quality. So generally speaking, what we're saying is the same way you check a borrower, like their credit score, to put it that way, their credit worthiness. When you're dealing with another country, now you have to include the risks associated with that country. If that country is unstable or there's a lot of corruption or you name it, anything that could be a risk because of the country, not necessarily the company, has to be included in your calculations and decision making. Debt repudiation versus debt rescheduling. Okay, since World War II, repudiation has only been done by China, Cuba, and North Korea. So it's rare, but it does happen. Recent steps to forgive debts of most of your cases, conditional on reforms targeted to improve poverty problems. Okay, so let's use Cuba and North Korea because China has changed a lot since World War II. So country in trouble, right? But who suffers really? The actual population of that country, high levels of poverty, and then with a high debt level, it's the people who suffer. So sometimes when these situations are as a humanitarian effort, debt sometimes forgiven in order to help improve the quality of life for the people living in those countries. Restructuring, most common form of sovereign risk, involves declaration of moratorium on current future debt obligations. So restructuring can be moratorium. Now remember, moratorium is not a debt forgiveness, it's just a delay. Stop payment until we say again, you can start paying again. Now they may say, okay, moratorium, stop payment. And then, little down the road, like a year later, a couple of years later, they're like, actually, you know what, forget it. We're just not going to pay it back. So it can get worse. It just depends. There's not much you can do. But restructuring also can be, as I mentioned earlier, lowering the interest rates, forgiving partial debt, extending the period of time they can pay, some kind of payment plan, etc. South Korea, Argentina, and Greece have had to do those things in different periods of time. More on debt restructuring, more likely to occur with international loan financing rather than bond financing. Remember, bonds are a form of lending. It's not the same as a loan. Smaller number of lending parties in international lending syndicate. So again, we're talking about loans, not bonds. Consensus is easier due to most international loan syndicates being made up of the same group of financial institutions. So what we're saying is that there are not many players in this international lending business. So when these things happen, a restructuring, and they have to agree, obviously the lender has to come to some kind of agreement. What they're saying is that because there's not many people involved and they typically in a syndicate, they just get together and come up with a solution. And that's why consensus is easier to reach a reasonable deal that everybody agrees with. Cross default provisions are the part of debt restructuring, and then behavior of governments and regulators in lending countries. All these things are part of debt things that you have to think of that could happen. For example, the behavior of governments and regulators in lending countries. So when restructuring, the lender may come to a consensus of what they think is reasonable, but then the government that you're dealing with may not. So because they're a sovereign country, you're pretty much at their mercy. And there's not a lot of legal recourse. Now, it's not that nothing can happen. If a country is misbehaving badly or it's not operating in good faith, sometimes other countries, the governments of your country or other countries involved can get together and apply economic pressure in order to ease the burden on the lenders. It's a way of protecting. So at that point, there's very little legal avenues you can approach to recover. But if things get too ugly, then there could be some government to government transactions, but not necessarily legal, more in economic deals. Country risk evaluation, outside evaluation models. Okay, so Euro money currency risk scores, just like a credit score, just called in a different way, a country risk level. Institutional investor country credit ratings, another way of saying credit score. And OECD country risk classifications. So you got scores, rating classifications, but they all come down to the same thing. It's about a way to measure the risk and utilize those measurements to estimate your risk when you lend in another country. So more here, you got the ECR, this here, the Euro money country risk scores for December 2020, for example. Consider resilience among countries that brought COVID-19 under control. So country risk doesn't necessarily have to do with the country going into a bad political situation. It could be, in this case, the COVID-19 pandemic hit hard all the economies. Some countries manage the situation better than others. So therefore, those countries that their economies were more resilient then are lower risk. European region downgraded for that happened with during that time in December 2020. They got hit really hard, but also remember that they saw COVID earlier than let's say United States, for example. Supply chain logistics and slow rates of vaccinations impacted worldwide economic outlook. If you didn't hear from it, this COVID-19 pandemic brought to light how delicate our supply chain logistics where across the world were placed, not just for us, but for everybody. Now, again, not everybody was impacted the same. So countries with lower issues on supply chain logistics become lower risk or better prepared or better able to deal with the situation. Analysts more concerned by economic rather than political risk implications. Under this perspective, how does economy deal with a situation that was unique or special or different or shock to the economy? Let's put it that way. It may come in different ways. So that's one type of risk that a country may be measured on, how well they deal with situations like that. But you still, on the other side, is also, do they have political problems, instability, a lot of corruption issues, etc. On the country risk classifications, country risk assessment model, or CRAM for short, it produces quantitative assessments, a number. It also provides a qualitative assessment. So quantitative can be strictly numbers. Okay, what are the economic numbers they have, the ups and downs, the standard deviations, and things like that. But then there's a qualitative, as we mentioned, political, legal, things that you observe. Hey, there's a revolution or a coup going on, or there's an opposing regime. All kinds are there war prone. But that's more qualitative. You may have some kind of probability attached to it, but it comes to an opinion, and you may say, well, that world leader in that country is a high risk versus that world leader in that country. It's a lower risk of I don't know, flying out the handle, doing something crazy. There are some internal evaluation models that are also used. These are more statistical models. Most common approach to evaluating sovereign country risk. So while you collect those scores and ratings that we spoke about, then you in-house going to have some kind of models to estimate what kind of risk you're dealing with when you are in that country. And as you see, country risk scoring models based primarily on economic ratios. So it's more about economics. What they do too is then they go up or down based on those other qualitative points that we mentioned. The selected variables are tested for predictive power in separating rescheduling countries from non-rescheduling countries using past data. So it's a technical analysis kind of approach. You use historical and then historical information, historical data, past trends, and then assume that the future may follow a certain pattern. Now, there's still some fundamentals. You may use all historical record, but then all of a sudden, an election happens or a takeover of the government happens, will something change, a fundamental point change. So you'll have to revisit, or the model may not be as good anymore. Commonly used economic ratios for these models: total debt service ratio, import ratio, investment ratio. And then they have what they call, you can apply it with a discriminant function. The point is, you have this variance, right? That's the variability, volatility. That's a very big number for risk. You got these ratios that you use there. You got the domestic money supply growth. That's the economics. That's the money supply you learn in economics. And these are the commonly used ones, but not necessarily the only ones, or all of them always used. But the point is that you can use as a good starting point to see if that country is of high risk or low risk. Imperfections or problems with statistical models. Measurements of key variables. Well, are the variables being measured properly? Sure, there's information that are out there, but it's never perfect. So though that data and those ratios that you're using as a variable are only as good as the quality or the accuracy of those numbers. Population groups. Finer distinction than risk age. What are they saying is they're putting countries in two groups. Either they are or they're not. Countries that reschedule their debt. There might be more to it. Might be more nuance to this type of, it may not be binary like that. Or it could be degrees. Somebody that could be a rescheduler, or let me rephrase that. Somebody that might be considered a non-rescheduler, but they're like at the bottom of that list. Like any given time, they can become a rescheduler. So those are going to be higher risk than somebody's a solid non-rescheduler. Political risk factors may not be captured. Again, this is qualitative, and any given time, and like I said, in elections, a revolution, corruption spikes or corruption is hidden very well. Strikes that may happen in countries that are strong unions, that may happen. You have index of economic freedom or corruption perceptions index. What they're saying here, this is another one of those qualitative ones type thing. Corruption perception, economic freedom. How accurate are those factors? And if that's even if you use them, or you can use them. Problems with statistical models, some more. Okay, so here it's the same problem, but not necessarily in a negative way as the other ones where you're not capturing the risk. Here is an example of it might be capturing too much risk or misrepresenting the risk at a higher level. Because if you look at it as a portfolio, let's say a lender is going to have loans out there in a variety of countries. Many large financial institutions with sovereign risk exposures diversify across countries. So because they are operating or have these loans in a variety of countries, and two things can happen. I mean, okay, so one country doesn't do too well, then the other country start doing really well because of that. It could be the case. And then all of a sudden, then you didn't have a problem. Your risk went down because of that. But these models do not capture that there because they treat it's a per country model, not a portfolio model approach. Diversification of risk not necessarily captured in CRM models. And that's what we're saying. Incentive aspects, borrowers and lenders, costs and benefits. Some countries are very high risk. You hear them in the news all the time. However, a lot of people still doing business there. And what they're saying here is that if there's a net benefit, like you still end up with a net positive, then yeah, people go ahead and do business, even if risk is high. Stability, model likely to require continuous updating. Too many things can change in a country. Too many things can change in multiple countries at the same time and all intertwined. So these models are far from perfect. And a model that may work well today in the morning, by the afternoon, some news breaks, that model is completely obsolete. Using market data to measure risk. Okay, so you can use secondary market for these debts, sellers and buyers. Or you can also, not or and or current market for sovereign debt. There's sovereign bonds, there's performing loans, non-performing loans. What we're saying is that there are other tools out there that have risk information in them. So if you observe the sellers and buyers, supply and demand, and the frequency, the volatility, etc., they can give you some information of what's going on out there risk-wise. And then the other items like bonds, loans, current data of loans and bonds that are out there can then give you an idea of what kind of risk you're dealing with in a specific country. So you can go with the models, as we say, use the stats, or you can just do comparative with other debt instruments and the supply and demand of debt in the secondary market, or a combination of both. That should be always recommended. However, it will require more time and resources to do that every time. So it's a decision you have to make, cost and benefit. That's it for this video. See you on the next one.